Barron Trump disguises himself as a broke tenant. His landlord's response will stun you. It was a chilly October evening when Barron Trump, dressed in simple clothes that made him nearly unrecognizable, stood outside a worn-down apartment building on the less affluent side of town. His hoodie pulled over his head and a duffel bag slung over his shoulder, he glanced around, taking in his surroundings. The street was quiet, lined with old brick buildings and the occasional flickering streetlight. His mission was clear. He wanted to experience life from a completely different perspective, one that wealth and status had never allowed him to see. Barron wasn't doing this out of some whimsical curiosity. He was determined to understand the struggles of everyday people, especially those who lived paycheck to paycheck. He had read countless stories about unfair landlords, rising rent costs, and the challenges of finding decent housing. But reading was one thing, living it was another. He wanted to see the reality for himself. The building's entrance was dimly lit, the paint peeling off the walls, and the smell of dampness hung in the air. Barron hesitated for a moment before pushing the door open and stepping inside. The hallway was narrow, lined with old mailboxes, some with broken locks, and the floor creaked under his feet. He could hear faint voices from the apartments around him, a mixture of laughter, arguments, and the hum of a television. Barron made his way to the third floor, where he had arranged to meet the landlord. His heart pounded slightly. This wasn't a world he was used to navigating. His usual life was filled with security teams, luxury, and comfort. Here it was just him. At the end of the hallway, a door opened, and a man in his late 50s stepped out. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a worn-out jacket and a suspicious expression. His name was Mr. Wallace, and he had been managing the building for over 2 decades. "You the new tenant?" Mr. Wallace asked, his voice gruff but not unfriendly. Barron nodded. "Yeah. Ben," he said, using the alias he had come up with earlier. "I just moved to the city, looking for a place to stay for a while." Mr. Wallace eyed him for a moment, then motioned for Barron to follow him. "Come on. I'll show you the unit." They walked down the hallway, passing several closed doors, until they reached a unit at the far end. Mr. Wallace unlocked the door and pushed it open, revealing a small, modest apartment. The walls were faded, and the furniture was minimal. A worn-out couch, a rickety table, and a bed that looked like it had seen better days. "It's not the Ritz, but it's got heat and running water," Mr. Wallace said, crossing his arms. "Rent's due at the beginning of every month. No exceptions. Got it?" Barron nodded, taking in the space. It was far from luxurious, but it was exactly what he had expected. "Got it?" Mr. Wallace handed him the key and gave him a long look. "You seem like a decent kid. Just don't cause any trouble and we'll get along fine." Barron set his duffel bag down on the creaky floor and took a deep breath. This was it, his new reality, at least for the next few weeks. The idea of blending into this world excited him more than it frightened him. For once, he wouldn't be judged for his last name or the privileges that came with it. Here, he was just another tenant trying to get by. The first few days passed without much incident. Barron kept a low profile, observing his neighbors and learning the rhythm of life in the building. He noticed Mrs. Jenkins, the elderly woman in the apartment next door, who always struggled with her groceries. There was also a young couple down the hall who often argued late into the night about money. Each person had their own story, their own challenges, and Barron felt a growing empathy for the world they lived in. But it wasn't long before Barron caught Mr. Wallace's attention again. This time, not in a good way. One evening, Barron was heading back to his apartment when he heard a heated argument coming from the hallway. Mr. Wallace stood in front of a young woman holding a toddler on her hip. Her face was flushed with frustration, and her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I told you, I just need a few more days," she pleaded. "I'll have the rent by Friday. My paycheck was delayed and—" "No more excuses, Lisa," Mr. Wallace interrupted, his voice stern. "You've already missed last month's payment. I've got bills to pay too. If you can't come up with the money by tomorrow, you're out." Barron clenched his fists as he watched the exchange. He could feel the injustice of the situation gnawing at him, but he forced himself to stay calm. He needed to approach this carefully. The woman nodded silently, her face crumpling as she turned and walked away, her child clutching her tightly. Barron watched her go, then turned to Mr. Wallace. Was that really necessary? He asked, keeping his tone neutral. Mr. Wallace raised an eyebrow. Look, kid, I've got a business to run. I can't afford to let tenants skip payments. If I do it for one, everyone will start taking advantage. I get that, Barron said, crossing his arms. But maybe there's a better way. A little empathy can go a long way. Mr. Wallace chuckled dryly. Empathy doesn't pay the bills. If you've got a better idea, I'm all ears. Barron didn't respond right away. He knew revealing his true identity would change everything, but that wasn't the point. He wanted to see if Mr. Wallace could be reasoned with on a human level, without the influence of power or wealth. Later that night, Barron knocked on Lisa's door. She opened it cautiously, her eyes red from crying. Hey, I couldn't help but overhear earlier, Barron said softly. I just wanted to check if you're okay. Lisa gave him a tired smile. Thanks. I'll be fine. It's just hard sometimes. But I'll figure it out. I always do. Barron nodded, admiring her resilience. If you need anything, let me know. Over the next few days, Barron found small ways to help Lisa and other tenants in the building, covering the cost of a broken heater for Mrs. Jenkins, offering to babysit Lisa's toddler while she worked late shifts, and even fixing a leaky faucet in another neighbor's apartment. Slowly, word spread about the mysterious new tenant who seemed to care a little too much for someone just scraping by. Then came the moment that changed everything. One rainy afternoon, Mr. Wallace called for a building-wide meeting in the cramped lobby. The tenants gathered, curious and a bit anxious. Mr. Wallace stood at the front, holding a clipboard and clearing his throat. All right, everyone, he began. I've got an announcement to make. The building's been sold. New management is coming in soon. A murmur spread through the crowd, mixed with confusion and concern. Lisa clutched her toddler, her face pale. Sold, she asked. What does that mean for us? It means you'll be dealing with a new landlord, Mr. Wallace said, shrugging. I'm out. My hands are tied. Barron stepped forward. Who's the new owner? Mr. Wallace glanced at him, then chuckled. Funny you should ask. At that moment, the front door swung open, and a man in a sharp suit stepped inside, followed by two assistants. He carried a leather briefcase and scanned the room with a practiced air of authority. Ladies and gentlemen, the man said, I'm Daniel Grayson, the new owner of this property. The air grew tense. Grayson was known for buying up buildings in struggling neighborhoods and turning them into high-priced developments, often evicting long-time tenants in the process. Barron's heart sank as he realized what was about to happen. Grayson wasted no time. We'll be conducting evaluations of every unit, he announced. Some tenants will need to be relocated as we renovate and improve the property. The word relocated hung heavily in the air. The air grew thick with tension. Tenants exchanged worried glances, whispering among themselves. The implications of relocation were clear. It meant eviction for many of them. Barron couldn't stand by and let this happen. He clenched his fists, taking a deep breath before stepping forward. Mr. Grayson, Barron said, his voice steady yet commanding, how exactly do you plan to evaluate who gets to stay and who doesn't? Grayson raised an eyebrow, giving Barron a dismissive glance. The criteria will be based on the building's future needs and upgrades. Unfortunately, not everyone will meet the standards. You mean the people who can't afford your inflated rents? Barron shot back, his eyes narrowing. This building is these people's home. They've built lives here. Uprooting them for profit is cruel. Grayson chuckled, folding his arms. And who are you to lecture me on business? You're just a tenant, aren't you? It's a tough world, kid. We all have to adapt. At that moment, Mr. Wallace's smirk widened, clearly enjoying the confrontation. But what he didn't know was that the tables were about to turn. Barron took a step closer, his eyes locked on Grayson. You're right. I'm just a tenant here. But there's something you don't know about me. The crowd fell silent, every eye on Barron. His heart pounded, but his resolve remained unshaken. It was time to reveal the truth. My name is Barron Trump, he said, his voice unwavering. And I've been living here undercover to understand what it's really like for people who struggle to make ends meet. I've seen firsthand the hardships they face, and I won't let you destroy their lives for the sake of profit. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Mr. Wallace's jaw dropped, his face going pale. Grayson blinked in shock, struggling to process what he had just heard. Barron? Trump? Grayson stammered. As in, the Trump family? That's right, Barron confirmed. And as of this moment, I'm stepping in to ensure this building remains a safe and affordable place for these tenants. Your plans for relocation are canceled. The room erupted into whispers and murmurs of disbelief. Tenants stared at Barron with a mixture of awe and gratitude. Lisa clutched her toddler, tears welling in her eyes. Grayson tried to regain his composure, clearing his throat. Mr. Trump, I had no idea. Perhaps we can discuss this in private. No need, Barron interrupted. My decision is final. These tenants have endured enough. It's time they had someone in their corner. Barron turned to face the crowd, his expression softening. From now on, I'll be personally overseeing the management of this building. Repairs will be made, but no one will be forced out. Your homes are safe. Cheers and applause filled the lobby as tenants surrounded Barron, thanking him profusely. Lisa hugged him, her voice trembling with emotion. Thank you so much. Mr. Wallace slinked toward the exit, trying to escape unnoticed, but Barron called out to him. Mr. Wallace, a word? Wallace froze, turning around slowly. Wyas, your time as building manager is over, Barron said calmly. I suggest you find another line of work, one that doesn't involve exploiting people. Wallace nodded meekly, avoiding eye contact as he hurried out of the building. Grayson, realizing he was completely outmaneuvered, gave Barron a stiff nod. I'll be in touch, he muttered before leaving. In the days that followed, the building underwent significant improvements. Maintenance issues were fixed, common areas were renovated, and a sense of community blossomed like never before. Barron made good on his promise, ensuring that every tenant felt valued and secure. He spent time with each resident, listening to their stories and learning from their experiences. Lisa found a more stable job with Barron's help, and Mrs. Jenkins no longer had to struggle with her groceries, thanks to a volunteer system Barron set up with other tenants. But what touched Barron the most was the transformation he saw in himself. His time in the building had given him a new perspective on life, one grounded in empathy, compassion, and a deep desire to make a difference. One evening, as the sun set over the city, Barron stood on the rooftop, gazing out at the skyline. Lisa joined him, her toddler asleep in her arms. Thank you, she said softly. Not just for saving our homes, but for seeing us, really seeing us. Barron smiled, his heart swelling with gratitude. I should be the one thanking you. You've taught me more than I ever could have imagined. As they stood there, surrounded by the hum of a city that felt a little more like home, Barron knew that this experience had changed him forever. And though his time in the building was coming to an end, the bonds he had formed and the lessons he had learned would stay with him always. He had set out to understand a world different from his own, and in doing so, he had found something far greater, a purpose. Days turned into weeks, and life in the building slowly returned to normal, except it was now infused with a new sense of hope and solidarity. Barron, true to his word, remained involved in the lives of the residents. Every morning, he'd walk through the halls, chatting with tenants, ensuring everything was running smoothly, and keeping a watchful eye on any lingering issues. Grayson, despite his initial arrogance, had been humbled by the experience. He now worked under strict oversight, following ethical guidelines set by Barron. Meanwhile, the tenants began organizing community events, turning what had once been a dilapidated building into a thriving hub of connection and friendship. One afternoon, Barron received a phone call from his mother, Melania. Barron, her voice was warm but curious, I've been hearing about what you've been doing at that building. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I wanted to see it through on my own, Mom, Barron explained. I didn't want anyone's help. I needed to understand what these people were going through from their perspective. Melania paused for a moment before responding. I'm proud of you, sweetheart, but I think it's time we take this even further. Barron raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? You've made a difference in one building, Melania said. Why stop there? What if we launched an initiative to help other struggling communities across the city? You've proven that it's possible to turn things around with compassion and determination. Barron's heart raced with excitement at the idea. He had been so focused on helping his current tenants that he hadn't thought about expanding his efforts. That's an incredible idea, he said. Let's do it. The Trump Community Initiative was born shortly after. Backed by resources from the Trump Foundation and Barron's hands-on leadership, the project aimed to rehabilitate rundown buildings and provide affordable housing for struggling families. The media quickly caught wind of Barron's efforts, dubbing him the People's Trump for his unorthodox approach and genuine dedication to helping those in need. But not everyone was thrilled about the initiative's success. A powerful real estate mogul named Victor Lang, known for his ruthless business tactics, saw Barron's project as a threat to his empire. Lang had made a fortune buying up low-income properties, displacing tenants, and turning them into luxury condos. Who does this kid think he is? Lang fumed during a meeting with his associates. He's meddling in matters he doesn't understand. If we let him continue, it'll set a dangerous precedent. One of his advisors leaned in. Should we apply pressure, sir? We can make things difficult for him. Lang smirked. Oh, we'll do more than that. Let's show young Mr. Trump how the real world works. The following week, Barron noticed strange developments around the building. Contractors hired by Lang's associates began blocking access to critical repairs. Tenants reported being harassed by unknown men, and eviction notices started appearing on doors despite Barron's assurances that no one would be forced out. Determined to protect his tenants, Barron confronted Lang at a high-profile city council meeting. Mr. Lang, Barron said, standing before the council members, I know exactly what you're doing. You're trying to sabotage our efforts to provide affordable housing. But I won't let you intimidate these people or destroy what we've built. Lang leaned back in his chair, feigning innocence. I have no idea what you're talking about, Mr. Trump. I'm merely conducting business. You call it business, Barron shot back, but I call it greed at the expense of human lives. The room fell silent. Council members exchanged glances, clearly aware of Lang's reputation but hesitant to challenge him publicly. But Barron wasn't backing down. I have evidence, Barron continued, holding up a folder. Documents showing your company's illegal activities, false eviction notices, and harassment tactics. It stops now. Lang's confident facade cracked for a brief second before he forced a smile. You're playing a dangerous game, Mr. Trump. Truth isn't a game, Barron said firmly. It's time someone stood up to people like you. The council launched an investigation into Lang's activities, uncovering a web of corruption that spanned years. Lang was forced to step down from his position, his empire crumbling as more evidence came to light. Barron's victory was celebrated not just by his tenants but by communities across the city. The Trump Community Initiative gained momentum, inspiring other young leaders to take up similar causes in their neighborhoods. One evening, as Barron walked through the building's courtyard, he spotted Lisa and her toddler playing with other children. She waved at him, her face glowing with happiness. You did it, she said, walking over to him. You saved us. No, Barron replied with a smile. We did it together. Months later, the building stood as a shining example of what could be achieved when people came together for a common cause. The once-forgotten structure had become a symbol of hope and resilience, a reminder that change was possible even in the face of overwhelming odds. Barron knew his journey was far from over. There were still countless communities in need of help, still battles to fight, and still lives to change. But as he stood on the rooftop once again, watching the city lights twinkle below, he felt a deep sense of purpose. He had found his calling, not in boardrooms or luxury towers, but in the heart of the city, among the people who had shown him the true meaning of strength and perseverance. And for the first time in his life, Barron Trump knew exactly where he belonged. Barron's victory over Victor Lang sent shockwaves throughout the real estate world. News outlets hailed him as the unlikely hero who stood up against the city's most ruthless tycoon. For many tenants and families across the city, Barron became a symbol of hope, a reminder that someone with power and influence was willing to fight for the underdog. But while the victory brought celebration, it also brought new challenges. Barron knew that the real battle was just beginning. His initiative had inspired many, But it had also attracted more powerful enemies, individuals far more dangerous than Lang. One morning, Barron stood at the window of his modest apartment within the building, overlooking the courtyard. A knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. It was Melania. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said with a warm smile, stepping inside. "I have news for you." Barron raised an eyebrow. "Good news or bad news?" Melania handed him a newspaper. The front page featured a headline in bold letters: "Powerful developers join forces to block Trump initiative." "Looks like they aren't backing down," she said, her tone serious. "Several high-profile developers are joining forces to pressure city officials into halting our expansion plans. They're afraid of what you're building here." Barron studied the article, feeling a familiar surge of determination. "If they think they can intimidate us into stopping, they're wrong." Melania placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "I know, but we need to be smart about this. The more attention we attract, the more they'll fight back. We have to stay one step ahead." Over the next few weeks, Barron and his team worked tirelessly to expand the initiative while countering the relentless attacks from powerful interests. They held community meetings, rallied public support, and enlisted the help of local activists. The tenants, many of whom had once been voiceless, now stood proudly beside Barron, ready to fight for their homes and their future. One evening, during a town hall meeting, Barron noticed an unfamiliar face in the crowd, a young journalist named Emily Reed. She introduced herself after the meeting, her eyes filled with curiosity. "I've been following your story," Emily said. "What you're doing here is incredible. I'd love to write a feature about it, to bring even more attention to the cause." Barron hesitated for a moment. He had learned to be cautious around journalists, but there was something genuine about Emily's enthusiasm. "All right," he said, "but this isn't just about me. It's about the people here. Their stories deserve to be heard." Emily spent the next several days interviewing tenants, capturing their stories of struggle and resilience. Her article, published in a prominent magazine, quickly went viral. The piece painted a powerful picture of the community's transformation and highlighted the importance of Barron's initiative. Suddenly, public support surged. Donations poured in, volunteers signed up to help with renovations, and even city officials who had once been skeptical began to take notice. But as the initiative gained momentum, the threats intensified. Barron began receiving anonymous letters warning him to back off. His car tires were slashed, and strange men were spotted lurking near the building at odd hours. One night, as Barron walked back to his apartment after a late meeting, he noticed a dark SUV parked across the street. The engine idled, and the windows were tinted, concealing whoever was inside. Barron's pulse quickened, but he kept his composure and walked calmly inside. He knew he couldn't face this growing threat alone. The next morning, Barron called an emergency meeting with his closest allies, including Melania and a trusted security advisor. "We're being watched," he said bluntly. "I won't let these people scare us into quitting, but we need to be prepared." Melania nodded. "We'll increase security around the building and notify the authorities. But you also need to be careful, Barron. These people won't play fair." Barron's eyes narrowed. "I've come too far to back down now." Despite the escalating threats, Barron continued his work. He spent days meeting with city officials, securing permits for new projects, and organizing community events to strengthen the bonds between tenants. But the pressure began to take its toll. Late nights and constant vigilance left him exhausted, and doubts crept into his mind. Was he doing enough? Was he putting the tenants at risk by pushing too hard? It was during one of these moments of doubt that Lisa, the young mother he had helped earlier, knocked on his door. "I wanted to check on you," she said, holding a plate of homemade cookies. "You've been working so hard for all of us. We just wanted to say thank you." Barron smiled, touched by the gesture. "Thank you, Lisa. That means a lot." Lisa hesitated before speaking again. "You've changed our lives, Barron. Don't ever doubt that. No matter what happens, you've given us hope, and that's something no one can take away." Lisa's words reignited Barron's resolve. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but he was ready for the fight. He wasn't just fighting for a building or an initiative, he was fighting for the future of countless families, for the belief that everyone deserved a safe place to call home. And he wasn't alone. The community he had helped to rebuild now stood firmly beside him, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The battle was far from over, but Barron Trump was more determined than ever.